Late at night, the quiet of the neighborhood was broken by the crackle of flames tearing through a modest home. Orange light danced against the dark sky as smoke billowed upward, drawing neighbors from their beds. Some stood frozen, hands covering their mouths, while others dialed frantically for help. In the middle of it all stood Angela, barefoot on the pavement, clutching her little boy tightly against her chest. His face was buried in her shoulder, too scared to look at the inferno that was once their home. The warmth she felt wasn't safety, it was the cruel heat of everything she had built slipping away in minutes. Her home, where birthdays had been celebrated and prayers whispered at night, was collapsing in flames. She watched the roof cave in with a sound that made her heart sink deeper than the fire ever could. Around her, whispers started to spread, carried in low, urgent tones between the gathered neighbors. "This wasn't an accident," someone muttered. "They're saying Margaret did it." The name cut through the night air like glass. Margaret, the woman from the HOA who always seemed to find fault in everything Angela did, the length of her grass, the color of her front door, even the laughter of her son playing outside. Now, the whispers claimed she had taken her resentment to a place no one thought possible. Angela's hands shook as she held her son closer, realizing in that moment that her family's safe haven was gone, not by chance, but by choice. Morning sunlight spilled weakly through the courthouse windows as Angela sat on a cold bench, her borrowed jacket too thin against the weight pressing down on her shoulders. Days had passed since the fire, yet the smell of smoke still clung to her memory. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flames devouring her walls, her family photos curling into ashes. She had lost her home, her belongings, even the sense of safety that once wrapped around her like a blanket. Beside her, her young son swung his legs nervously, his small shoes barely touching the floor. He looked up at her with wide, searching eyes. He didn't ask about the toys that had burned or the bed he no longer had, he only asked if they would be okay. Angela forced a smile, though her chest ached. She brushed a hand over his hair and whispered, "A house is made of wood, but a home is made of us. And we still have that." Her voice cracked, but her words held firm. She knew she couldn't let despair swallow her. Her son needed to see resilience, not ruin. He needed to know that even when the world seemed cruel, hope could still be chosen. Around them, people rushed in and out of the courtroom, their footsteps echoing like reminders that life went on, even for those whose lives had burned to the ground. Angela sat taller, pulling her boy close, silently promising that no fire, no hatred, would take their spirit away. The heavy courtroom doors creaked open, and Angela rose to her feet with her son, bracing for the trial that could decide his future. Her heart pounded, every step echoing louder in her chest than the shuffle of the people filing in. Then, as the jury entered, her breath caught in her throat. Leading them was a face she knew all too well, Margaret. The very woman whose bitterness had sparked the whispers of arson, whose watchful eyes had judged her every move in the neighborhood. And now, impossibly, she walked in as the jury forewoman, holding the fate of Angela's son in her hands. Angela's fingers tightened around her boy's, the room blurring for a moment. It felt like a cruel twist of fate, as if the universe had conspired to pile one injustice atop another. How could this be real? How could the woman who took her home now sit in judgment of her child? She wanted to cry out, to demand answers, but the courtroom was silent, waiting for the trial to begin. Margaret's gaze swept across the room before landing on Angela. For a brief second, their eyes met. Angela searched for malice, for the smug superiority she had always seen in Margaret before. But this time, she saw something different, an uneasiness, a heaviness that seemed to weigh Margaret down. Angela turned away, her jaw clenched. Whether it was guilt or pretense, it didn't matter. All she knew was that the woman who had burned her past now stood ready to decide her son's future. The trial unfolded slowly, each word heavy with consequence. Angela sat rigid in her seat, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could feel Margaret's presence just rose away, a constant reminder of everything she had lost. Yet as the proceedings dragged on, Angela began to notice something strange. Margaret wasn't cold or dismissive as she once had been. Instead, her expression wavered, her eyes often downcast, as if she carried a burden too heavy to hide. When it was her son's turn to testify, Angela's heart swelled with both pride and fear. He stood nervously, his small frame dwarfed by the witness stand, but his voice carried with a quiet strength that hushed the room. He spoke of mistakes, of second chances, of what his mother had always taught him, that hate could never drive out hate, and forgiveness was stronger than vengeance. His words trembled but did not break, and by the time he finished, even the judge seemed to pause in reflection. Angela's gaze flicked to Margaret. To her astonishment, tears shimmered in the woman's eyes, her lips pressed tight as though holding back sobs. The walls of superiority that Margaret had once built around herself now appeared to crumble. In that fragile moment, Angela saw not the cold neighbor who burned her world, but a woman confronting her own humanity. The silence that followed her son's testimony was thick with something unspoken. A shift, a possibility that healing might take root in the very place where harm had been done. When the trial concluded and the verdict was read, Angela exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Relief mixed with exhaustion as she held her son close, grateful that his future had not been destroyed. The courtroom slowly emptied, but before Angela could leave, she felt a hesitant presence approach. She turned, and there stood Margaret, no longer the rigid, untouchable woman from the HOA, but someone visibly shaken, her eyes swollen and red. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Margaret's voice broke the silence, soft and unsteady. "I can't undo what I did to you, what I took from you. But I need you to know, I see it now. I see the pain I caused." Her words hung in the air, trembling but sincere. She swallowed hard before continuing. "I want to help rebuild what I tore down. Not just your house, but trust. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Angela felt her chest tighten. Every part of her had the right to turn away, to let bitterness take root. But then she looked at her son, standing by her side, watching. He had just spoken in court about forgiveness, about breaking the cycle of hate. How could she ask him to live by those words if she herself refused? Slowly, she nodded. "I forgive you," she whispered, not for Margaret's sake, but for her own healing. Months later, Angela and her son stood before a newly built home, surrounded by neighbors who had come together to help. For the first time since the fire, Angela felt the warmth of belonging again. Her house had risen from the ashes, but more importantly, so had her hope. It wasn't just wood and walls, it was proof that compassion could rebuild what hate tried to destroy.